It's interesting, this here would have been an historical land tipping point for people to dump their rubbish and stuff. The Friends of Dromore, the River Trust organisation, did a spring clean here. We've done that in another couple of spots throughout the catchment, but this was just awash with litter, batteries, pharmaceuticals, silage bales, the whole lot, like, you know, we're all dumped in here. We got, during the spring clean week or month, we got 2 skips from the local authorities and we filled them using the labour of people within the conscious people that were keen to see the place cleaned up, like, you know.
In the middle of the Derry Valley subcatchment here now, where we are, I sort of mentioned briefly on the bus about the pollution impact potential mapping that the EPA would have produced, and again, this, unlike the last site, which maybe, you know, has just a corner of it that was identified as a critical source area, rank 1, this entire farm, and you can see it even in the ground and that in the grass that's been grown, is very productive. It's intensive agriculture, it's dairy, so it's contributing, or potentially contributing, a lot of nutrients, if not managed correctly, back into a Dromore system. And the Dromore River, you can't see it because there's no trees to delineate where we are, which is an issue in itself. It's just at the back of that fence, there. Now that fence there was put in, again, we took guidance from the EPA in terms of the PIP ranking sites. You can't see it, but that river actually is meandering. So what we done here was established a deeper buffer at the back of that fence and tried to position it in between the meander of the river. It just, it was sort of integrated back into the landscape. It was more palatable, I suppose, for the landowner, because it left that it wasn't the case it was coming out. It was already ground that maybe if you're working a machine, you're going to have to zigzag in anyway. And farmers love straight fences. So it was, it worked really well in that regard. Fran made the point on the bus about managing it, letting livestock back into it. And whilst that wouldn't have been the purpose of the gate, we say on the last one, something that's probably missing here, Fran, because it's not as wet grass, and we could have left the gate on that as a way of letting 1 or 2, if you have the trust, and maybe that's a case of building the trust to understand that we can do that. The 1 or 2 livestock go in, take it off periodically, and then reduce, we'll say, the nutrient load actually in the buffer zone itself. Because eventually, and we haven't modelled it or got a time on that, that could potentially act as a source of pee in itself. So probably into the future, it's important to start considering now where we have put. Now, the next site that we go to, we have to give a little bit of consideration to that, and we can touch on that as it is. So it just worked out well. This particular landowner was important to get on board. Would own probably 600 acres in this particular catchment. So we've walked, fenced off approximately 1.5 to 2 kilometres linear metres of catchment here. And where it meanders like that, and where it also, it's not just as obvious here because there's a flat base to this, so flow will coming down, it'll eventually gather up a bit of roughness and maybe isn't just as critical, but there's other parts of this farm whereby it's positioned exactly where the overland flow is to intercept. So it was a matter of taking a farm-wide approach here and working with the landowner. Now, just this is Woodlands for Water site as well. So when we were getting up and going, we had a certain amount of money, I suppose, to put in some of this fencing. But we also tried to utilise other programmes, other environmental programmes that were there. One being the Woodlands for Water. So it's a case that this particular patch now that's serving its function as a buffer, the farmer can now convert that into Woodlands for Water and get a payment on that. Because this particular parcel is probably about a quarter of an acre, believe it or not, 0.2 to 0.25. It qualifies because it's over that 0.1 of an acre, so it qualifies. So whilst that only probably translates as a small amount of money, if you were just to put it there, we identified other parcels of land on the site where we could also put in Woodlands for Water, taking the total up to about a hectare across it. So it means that there's an annual payment of approximately €1,500 to the farmer, whilst we're getting it also in the areas that we need to get it in. We didn't mind it being in other areas as well, because it will give its own value, but it was important that we had it in these areas.
I suppose when we came to this farm, there was absolutely no hedgerow, there was absolutely no fencing, and you'll see in some of the photographs in the report or whatever, the effect that has with runoff straight into the stream and one thing and another. So it's always a win when you get the fence up initially because of, and the hedging, and obviously you've got the biodiversity. It's all native trees that are and native hedging that's used. So there's also that effect with the biodiversity that's been enhanced throughout the catchment, which is always, it's a win-win situation for everybody then, like, you know.
Just back to the pesticides end of things. Cal asked me there about, you know, is this ground, we'll say, heavily sprayed? It looks intensively managed. Certainly all this sort of ground before the project commenced in 2018 would have been, certainly the project before commenced in 2018 would have been heavily sprayed. But like that, working with the landowners, this is examples maybe of some of the physical mitigation that's put in place, but there's other incentives there in terms of the scheme operates a weed wiping service whereby it uses the glyphosate and the weed wiper and it targets the species. And then we were getting in through the door and Ross was managing that, and we're probably hitting a lot of the farmers we need to, but we still were seeing elevated MCPA within our source. So Ross actually had the idea then of actually going out and working with the farmers to calibrate their actual sprayer. It's better to have a calibrated sprayer than not have a calibrated sprayer, not partaking in any of our programs on that. So in terms of most of the farmers in this catchment will be either working off the weed wiping service or with the good tight end cap and the calibration of the sprayer.
So it's not only calibration, it's certification and maintenance on that boom sprayer. And we put low drift nozzles on because an awful lot of the spray that they get from boom sprayers can come airborne, like, you know. And one tiny drop of MCPA, which is a herbicide that's used, that basically tackles all the broadleaf plants in the sward or whatever. So there's 58 products available, MCPA products available in the country, and it's not only been used by farmers, it's been used by domestic people as well. So it's very important to get that information out about pesticides and its effect. One small drop can pollute 30 kilometers of stream. So it just shows you what you're up against, like, you know. Listen, time is tight. We have to get back on our chariots and move on to the next site.
Just take one point, just because maybe somebody might ask it, is in terms of concentration, we were seeing levels of maybe 0.2, 0.3 higher micrograms per litre up at the treatment plant. And as the lad said earlier on, that particular treatment plant is a dissolved air filtration system. So pretty much 95% of MCPA that goes in, that end of it comes out through the tap. So that's why we really had a focus on our MCPA. The likes of these measures, right enough, we couldn't do it across the catchment because it is money intensive. But MCPA, whilst we were targeting maybe phosphorus in this particular instance, it does have a benefit for MCPA because it's a similar pathway. You know, it's highly mobile whenever, or it's highly soluble whenever it reaches water, therefore leaving it mobile to overland flow. And as we've seen the tractors slipping and sliding coming across, there is a heavy clay underneath this particular sward, so it's very vulnerable to overland flow. The project probably, in terms of concentrations, the Derry Valley subcatchment that were in the exit point, it was probably about 0.2 micrograms per litre on average of the concentration across 2019 into the second year of the project. The average concentration came down to 0.13 the following year, and we calculate our flows. There's a EPA hydrometric station on the outflow of this particular subcatchment, so when we do some loading analysis on that, it worked out that there's actually approximately a 50% reduction year on year. Now, it did struggle again the following year, but last year, we haven't done the loadings on it yet, but when we've done our annual average concentration on it, it's down now at 0.06, so it's below that 0.1. Now, and last year, without preempting the results, was a wet year, so it's not as a case that it was low flow throughout the summer causing a low concentration. It was a lot of low flow, a lot of valuable water last year.
Something else about them in Monaghan, they're very flashy catchments. This catchment could be dry now, a heavy storm, and you wouldn't be able to walk in this. You know, it can happen within 24 hours. A dry field can become a very, very wet field. So the impetus and a lot of the focus of source protection this year is about slowing the flow. You've heard the expression. It's really, really important. And of course, vegetation is the best way to slow the flow. So the hedgerows, and you can see the difficulties up there in all the hedgerows you've been passing, is the ash dieback. You see all the trees that are dying in the ash plant. You see the removal of hedgerow in a lot of areas because farm machinery is bigger and they tend to do more paddock grazing, the dairy farmers. So a lot of those natural forces that slow down the flow in a catchment like this is flooded. So that then means you have a bigger flow and a quicker flow down into these smaller streams, and that feeds down to flooding downstream. So it's a way of trying to, you know, that hedgerow will help to slow that flow. Any vegetation will help to slow the flow. It's probably as good a thing as there is to slow that water flow. So you've got to be thinking of flood mitigation, climate climate change and all that there. So there's those things to be considered in this as well. But you will see the damage of the ash dieback. I was saying on the way up in the good trailer that we reckon we're going to lose 95% of our trees in the ash dieback epidemic. It's absolutely dreadful. So and it's our most predominant tree in the Irish countryside. And
Essential for hurleys as well.
yeah, and they make hulls for it in Holland. Which? No,
just the
ash, just the ash. Not just, I shouldn't say just the ash, it's the ash tree. And it was only first reported in 2009. The disease was identified. Again, it was imported by the Department of Agriculture, allowing in stock that was diseased. And similarly now, they allowed the importation a few years ago of whitethorn that is infected as well. So now we have it's called whitethorn blight. So you're losing hedgerow now, the whitethorn, which is that beautiful flowering plant that you see all over the countryside at the minute. We're in danger of losing those as well.